Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org. Tonight, we have Dennis Foster. He has worked at the South Rim and the North Rim of the Grand Canyon since the late 1970s and early 1980s. Since that time, he has maintained an incredible and avid interest in Grand Canyon's history. He has completed hundreds of hikes into the canyon and has written about many of his treks for the local Flagstaff newspaper, the Arizona Daily Sun. Dennis has a Ph.D. in economics and taught at the W.A. Franke College of Business at Northern Arizona from 1990 until his retirement in 2023. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Dennis Foster.
Yes, thanks very much, Wayne. It's an interesting venue that we get here with these outings where we get a little bit more time to talk about some topics that in the symposium, we got a time limit, and you have to throw a lot of things out, and there's a lot of things you wish you could talk about. And I'm sure even for this particular hour, there's going to be things that I won't be able to talk about because there is so much going on with Walcott, with his journey in the Grand Canyon, and with some related tangential issues here. So I did title this as an extended look of my earlier presentation from 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And I'm going to add in some pictures of where he was hiking. Of course, not that he took, but that I have since I've been through these areas many, many times. And so I thought that would help in terms of sort of illustrating his time in the Grand Canyon. Talk a little bit more about some of the details around it, and hopefully you find this interesting. Sort of like a director's edition or a commentary track of a movie in some respects. He was there from November of 1882 to February of 1883. And he spent about 81 days in the Grand Canyon doing all his studying. But his paper on this particular trip and the data that he collected really didn't come out for 10 years. So the map that I've got there was published with this paper in 1894. The sketch drawing that I have here on the front slide, same thing. This was by a guy named B.L. Young, who somehow ended up joining his trip about halfway through and drew some really stunning looking sketches. I think they're very nice. They aren't, the same as what we had with Dutton, but I think still quite outstanding. And then some photographs of him, of Walcott down at the bottom when he was a young man, a middle-aged guy and an older guy. I think back when he was the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. So some of the backstory. Why was I actually interested in Walcott? The simple answer is I wasn't interested in Walcott. I was interested in Kolb Natural Bridge, and I wanted to know more about that. I had done a deep dive into Barry Goldwater's modern discovery of the bridge. He had flown over the Grand Canyon a couple times and seen it, and asked a bunch of people in the Park Service about it, and they didn't know what he was talking about. And he couldn't find anybody or any sources that ever mentioned the bridge in Upper Nankoweap. And I thought, well, Walcott was there back in the late 1800s, and he was there for a long time, so I'm sure he saw it. And if I could get a hold of his journals, I bet I would find a reference to that. So that's what started me down the road of Walcott. Now, I think even today, if you try to look up much about him, especially with regard to Grand Canyon, you're not going to find much. I have a couple of fairly popular history books about the Grand Canyon, and there is less than one paragraph about Walcott. I mean, he doesn't even get a whole paragraph in terms of discussion. It usually segues into some other related issue. And even when you do find any kind of an account of him, even if it's just one paragraph, a lot of times it's not right. The trail was built in 1882, but I've seen it stated that it was before 1880. I've seen it stated that it was 1890. I've seen it stated that it was an improved Indian route, which in that case, I think the authors were just making that up because there's no evidence that that's the case, although I'm going to talk about an Indian route that is right near there in a couple of minutes. And so to really find out more, I needed to do more digging. And so that's what I ended up following until I ended up with this presentation some years ago. So I ended up going to the South Rim, the Grand Canyon Museum collection there. And there's some stuff there on Walcott, although it's on microfiche back then, and had to read it on one of those strange machines. I also contacted the folks at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, and I made a couple of trips out there to look over some of the material that they had that involved Walcott, including a biography written by a woman back in 1937 that was never published. And so one of the chapters was on Grand Canyon, and I found it very interesting what she had to say. At the time, Walcott's widow would have been still alive, so she may have had some close connection to Walcott's story, which is kind of interesting. I also got a copy of his journal from the Smithsonian. They were very gracious at sending me a photocopy. Back in those days, there wasn't any electronic transfer, so they actually just sent it to me. I think it's important in terms of how we frame it to maybe think about this quote from Ellis Yockelson, who wrote a 2-volume biography of Walcott. And he wrote, quote, "A few pioneering geologists spent time within the canyon, studying its sequence from the rim downward in more detail than those who observed it from above or below. The first of these was Charles Doolittle Walcott." And it's like, yeah, that's his kind of claim to fame with regard to the Grand Canyon, is that he spent 81 days in the Grand Canyon. He got to really study the canyon in terms of its depth and breadth, more so than those that were more tangential. And Yockelson may be making a little dig here at Clarence Dutton, who studied it from above, and Major Powell, who studied it from below, although, of course, both of those people did do some hiking around to further their investigations. So who was Walcott? Just a little bit of a background. He was born in New York State in 1850. He didn't finish school, but he fell in with a guy that owned a big farm and collected fossils. And so Walcott ended up doing that. He collected fossils, and then they would sell them to bigger collectors or institutions, which I don't think is still an industry anymore in the US. But that's what he was doing to get by. And in 1870, he met Louis Agassiz, who was maybe the premier geologist in the United States. And if you're from Flagstaff, you know there's a mountain here named after him. But he met him when he sold a big collection of fossils and decided he wanted to be a scientist. And so he basically taught himself. Along the way, he got a job with the New York State geologist for a couple of years. He wrote some papers, and he seemed to be very good at doing this. In 1879, an application that he filled out was accepted by the then newly formed USGS, and he became employee number 20. So that was in July 1, 1879. And almost right away, he was sent out west. He was sent out to do some geological study and also some paleontological work. And so he didn't really get any rest in that regard. And he was in Kanab. He was in Kanab for 2 months, and not just in Kanab, he was in Kanab Canyon. And he was studying the rock layers all the way down Kanab Canyon to the Colorado River. And that's probably one of those things, even if you know him about the Nankoweap area, it's like you probably don't know that he spent another couple of months over in Kanab, and he did that in 1879, and then later in 1882 he was back there in Kanab. So the kinds of things that sort of related here, he was looking for fossils. Back then you couldn't date rocks, you couldn't date rocks, period. What you could do is you could try to figure out which ones seemed to be younger, which ones seemed to be older, how were they laid, was it consistent, or were they upturned? And then you would look for fossils in the fossil record and try to track certain layers, across space. And so that's a lot of what Walcott was doing. He was collecting fossils. In fact, in his trip in the Nankoweap area and down to Chuar, he collected over 1,200 samples of these fossils. And there's a trilobite listed there, which is one of the ones he found quite a bit. And in terms of the rocks themselves, not only was he identifying what they were, he was also measuring how thick they were. And one of the couple of ways to do that, one is to use a barometer, and hopefully it's well set. And another one is to use something called a Lox level, which I have a picture of here. And I have one that looks just like it. In fact, that might be the one I bought from eBay. But there's a little hole in the one end. I don't know if you'll be able to see that little hole in one end that you look through, and you look through the glass at the other end. And there's a grid line, and there's a level on top, and it's mirrored onto the glass, and you tip it around until the bubble is right in the middle of the grid. And then you know what's on that grid line is exactly the same height as you are to your eye. Well, that means you could figure out the width of the rock layers by just climbing up 5.5 feet every time. So not a real easy way to do this, but it was a way to be pretty precise. And apparently his measurements from back in these days were very, very good. So why was he in Nankoweap? Well, he was sent back to Nankoweap in 1880, or back to Kanab in 1882 in the summer to do some more work. He had been doing some work in Nevada, and he was in Kanab Canyon. And that summer, Powell got complete control over the budget of the USGS, and it doesn't seem like a coincidence that right away he decided that we're going to have this expedition or exploration of the eastern part of the Grand Canyon, because he then sent a telegram to Walcott to get some men and to meet him in House Rock Valley and to join him on this excursion. Well, the Walcott Journal is interesting, but unfortunately he doesn't mention anything really outside of what he's doing in terms of he's hiking up Nankoweap Butte, he's doing something else, but he does not seem to be very sort of cognizant, or at least he doesn't express it in his journal, of his surroundings. He doesn't talk about, oh man, how wonderful this place is. He doesn't mention any waterfalls. There's a waterfall in Nankoweap. He doesn't mention anything about Indian ruins, and I'm sure he must have walked by them or through them quite often in his travels there. He doesn't mention the arch, the natural bridge. There's another one in Chuar. He doesn't mention any of that, but he mentions where he hiked, and I'm quite sure that he saw them on his hikes and his measurements, but not any of that shows up in his journal. So I have to kind of try to figure it out, try to use my judgment to interpret what he's saying to best understand this journey, because then I'm also interested in sort of the hiking part of it, that aspect of exploring the canyon, which I've been doing for more than 45 years. And I was hoping to get more of that out of Walcott. You don't get that much. But one of the things I did notice when I was reading his first report was that even though they don't use a lot of names, in fact, I've got this here in a moment. This is another quote from Yockelson about his writing style. Walcott wrote plainly and to the point, eschewing superlatives, and never used words such as eschew, which is kind of funny, but actually very true. But in the journal, this is 1882, 1883, there aren't a lot of places that have sort of gotten official names yet. In fact, I'm not sure that any of these were even official. We can recognize Nankoweap. He's using the term Nankoweap, Quagunt, Nankoweap Butte, Nankoweap Butte, Chuar, Chuar Lava Hill, and Chuar. He also uses the term Trail Canyon, which I infer to be the canyon that's right beside Tilted Mesa, but he doesn't put that on his map, so he doesn't say it explicitly. But I think there are some hints in his journal that tell us that that's what it was. He used the term Red Valley for a place they were at late on in their expedition. And that got changed from the time of the journal in 1883 to the time the paper was published in 1894 to Unkar. So Unkar Valley is Red Valley, or Unkar Canyon is what he calls Red Valley in his journal. In fact, even in the 1884 USGS report, where he details what he did the previous year, it's already changed to Unkar. And when I read that, and I'm reading that they went a little further and that they went down a very narrow chute into this one canyon, I realized that he had gone as far as Asbestos Canyon, and I've been to Asbestos Canyon a few times, and I thought, well, this is pretty astounding that he doesn't get more attention as a result of how far he had hiked. And he's hiking here before Hance is here, before Bass is here, before any of those people are really in the area. So it really is quite an exceptional sort of feat that he's accomplishing in all this. And then one more name that does show up in his journal is Vishnu's Temple. And of course, we know where that is. Perhaps the single, I want to say single, but actually double best source for any information about Walcott is the 2-volume biography written by Ellis Yockelson. I was able to meet Ellis just before the first volume came out, so I hadn't seen it yet. I met him at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and he passed me a unpublished manuscript that he had for the details of the Grand Canyon part of Walcott's life. And I found that very interesting. In fact, it validated what I had done in terms of transcribing Walcott's journal. And then I shared with him what I thought was the map of Walcott's actual travels through the Grand Canyon. He was very excited to see that. But those two books, lots and lots of detail about Walcott's fascinating life, really. And really, he was sort of had fallen into obscurity at the, back in the early 1900s. He's probably, kind of a B-lister in terms of notoriety. Some people knew him, but really kind of faded until the late 80s, early 90s, when Stephen Jay Gould published Wonderful Life about the Burgess Shale and the revolutionary interpretations made about the fossils from that shale in Canada. And Walcott's the one that found those fossils. And so he gets a lot of attention in that book. And so his sort of persona sort of rises, but not with regard to Grand Canyon, with regard to the Burgess Shale. Here is the telegram that is gone through 3 different transcriptions, I guess, that went to Walcott from Powell in late October 1882. You can see it was sent to Fort Wingate, New Mexico, and from there it was sent to Kanab, Utah, and then from there it was delivered to C.D. Walcott. And the note from Powell there in the lower part of the transcription, please send C.D. Walcott information that I'm coming across the Colorado to Kanab by way of Lee's Ferry and desire him to join me in an expedition to Grand Canyon. Mr. Chute has started in advance. And of course, although it was his desire, it wasn't really a request. It was, that's where he was going to spend the next 3 months, whether he was sort of planning on it or not. And one of the things I was interested in is who was actually on this trail building, in this trail building party. I haven't seen anything written about it, any details about it. It's just Powell came, built the trail, and left Walcott in Nankoweap. Well, there are some names that pop up in Walcott's journal with regard to the context of the trail building that I think probably were, involved in all this. There was Major Powell. There was Mr. Chute, who was Major Powell's assistant. There was Jack Hillers, which interests me a lot because he was on the second Powell expedition down the Colorado River, and he was the photographer for the USGS. But I have not seen any journals that he might have written for this 1882-83 period. I haven't seen any photographs. I think it's maybe Duke University has an archive of Hiller's photographs, and they have it separated by topic and year. And 1882-83 Grand Canyon doesn't show up in their listing. And I don't know, maybe I'll take a visit there sometime and see what I can see. There's a John R. Stewart, which may be the same John R. Stewart that is working with Mathis and Evans in 1903, 1904, 1905 to map the Grand Canyon. So a little bit later, 20 years later, it may be the same person, I'm not sure. And a Victor M. And there are no details about these people, but these people all were associated with Powell coming to the canyon. Then there's Charles Walcott, of course. Charles Haskell was his assistant collecting fossils. He was working with him in Kanab, and then he continued to work with him in the Grand Canyon, Nankoweap, Chuar area. But about halfway through, he was pretty depressed and he left. So he didn't stay for the whole trip. Joe Hamblin was a packer, local boy, Mormon boy, and then John Brown, another local Mormon, was the cook. And then Joe Hamblin's an interesting story that I don't know that we're ever going to know anything about either as well. But Joe Hamblin, if it's the same Joe Hamblin, and I assume it is, was the guy that was bringing down the supplies to Powell's second river trip to the Paria when his men were at the Paria, and took 14 days to get there from Kanab, and the guys at Paria were really, feeling the pangs here of no supplies. He later was hired to take mules down Kanab Canyon to fetch Jack Hillers and Clem Powell at the end of the river trip when Powell decided, okay, it's over, we're done at Kanab Creek, let's get out of here. Clem and Jack stayed behind, and when they got to Kanab, they hired Joe Hamblin and another guy to go down and fetch everything. And now he's showing up here in the Walcott expedition, with Walcott in the canyon all these days. So a person that you wish you knew more about in terms of his interaction with all these explorer types. B.L. Young, another kind of an interesting thing. I learned this from the unpublished manuscript by Adele Jenny. The B stands for Brigham, and he is like the 56th child of Brigham Young. He's like the last one, I don't know, the last one or next to last one. Apparently Brigham Young had 56 or 57 children with all his various wives. And he ended up there at the time of the trail building, and then he ended up coming down and replacing Haskell when Haskell left. And he's the one that drew those sketches, like the one I just showed you a couple of minutes ago. So an interesting person in that regard. A few years later, he met Frederick Dellenbaugh, who was on the Kaibab Plateau doing something. And they had a talk, and Dellenbaugh was quite impressed with his grasp of geology and the like, and impressed with his time that he spent with Walcott. There's local Mormons on this building expedition that get mentioned: Charles Chambers, Judd Adams, Dave Hamlin, Billy Thompson. Absolutely nothing about them, just their names in passing. There's an Indian mail carrier who's going to bring mail into the canyon and take it out every 2 weeks. So some people claim that, Walcott was like cut off from civilization, and he wasn't really. Stuff was coming in every couple of weeks, and he was there. I don't know how involved any of these people were, but I presume everybody was pitching in to make this trail. And then later, John Brown, who was the cook with Walcott, left, and Achilles Brown replaced him. So those were later additions to Walcott's little group. So I'm going to show you the route I think he took, a little bit of the explanation for why, and use a couple of maps here. One of the Nankoweap area, one of the Chuar area, one of the Ankar area. So there's a wagon camp at the end of the road. If you've been to the trailhead or the road area there, and there's a trailhead parking, the old road used to go way up that slope, and I was on that road back in the early 80s. It's too bad you can't do that anymore, but I'm sure the wagon camp was up that slope quite a ways, not where you park today. But then Walcott gets there, and on November 17th, 1882, he arrives at the saddle. He also arrives extremely sick. He's been lagging behind everybody heading out here by 3 or 4 days. He thinks later, he says he thinks he had diphtheria, and for that you have a buildup of mucus around your throat, and you eventually can die. And while he's resting in a cabin on the way here, he spots a bottle of turpentine and actually drinks some of it, which is hard to imagine. And apparently it burned off all the stuff around his throat, and probably a bunch of other stuff. And he survived, but he was ill, and he didn't participate in any of the trail building as they got down to the bottom of Nankoweap. But here is the Nankoweap Trail as we know it, more or less. The little red dots show intermediate campsites, and really I've got 3 along the way because those are the 3 spots that really need to be worked on to make the trail work. The first one at the saddle, you need to get through the upper Supai Cliff, and there's switchbacks there, and there's still hardware you can see in the trail. The second one is on the ridge leading down to Tilted Mesa, and I have that identified because that's really a big spot where 14, 15, 16 people could camp out. And you need that because there's some trail construction in the red wall down below Tilted Mesa. And then the last one is up above the Tepeats, which needed some work as well. And then somehow the trail, I think, got into that canyon, what he calls Trail Canyon, and then they just walked down the canyon the rest of the way to the creek. Whereas the trail today is a little bit more refined in that regard. Now there is an old Indian route in the area. It goes up this canyon between Cedar Point and Marion Point. I've been on it 3 times, most recently just last month. and it's a total bushwhack, and it's pretty miserable, but it's definitely an old Indian route. I found this pictograph under an overhang on the way up a few years ago, and I put the dates on these pictures to let you know when they were taken. And maybe the prospectors, the old day prospectors used it too. There's a mule shoe that's along the route in one little spot. And if you know anything about where the Indian ruins are in Nankoweap, this route makes a lot more sense than the Nankoweap Trail does. So I suspect that the idea that the Nankoweap Trail was on an old Indian route was really just sort of made up. It would have been a very difficult thing to do. There's water along this route. There's water where that little blue dot is. So it's a much easier way to access, especially if you do that often. Walcott rode down to the river with Major Powell on November 25th. Major Powell left on the 26th. They were all done. And I guess he got his last sort of marching orders about what they're going to do for this little trip. He wants him to study the rocks as far south as he can, and I suspect, and this is part of the next argument here, is I suspect that the default was for Walcott to follow along the river to do all this geological work. Go along the river, go up in these canyons, go along the river, go up in these canyons, and so on. And this might have been a little introductory scouting out of the river route. Well, he was eventually forced to use the Butte Fault route and not the river route. But again, like I said, this is going to inform, I think, this next argument I'm going to make, which is how did he get to Quagunt? Almost certainly he did not take the actual Butte Fault route because it's awful. But some people have suggested, well, maybe if you go up to the west of Nankoweap Butte, it wouldn't be so bad for the mules that they have. They have 9 pack mules in this little expedition. And maybe you can get down to Quagunt Creek. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I've never been on there. I've never met anybody who has talked about it, if they have done it. So I'm not really sure how viable that is. And so my presumption is that Walcott took the river route, that they went down to the river, followed it down to Quagunt, and then up Quagunt Creek to a camp, which isn't, going up Quagunt isn't the easiest thing to do. There's a couple of tricky spots there, but he does say in his field notes for December 5th and 6th that it took an entire day to move to Quagunt. And if they were just going up over, near Nankoweap Butte, I'm not sure that sounds like an entire day. I mean, it might be, but I know that going down to the river and down and then up, that's a good long trip. In fact, from Quagunt, he got all the way to Chuar in one day. So one day from Nankoweap to Quagunt, one day from Quagunt to Chuar. And of course, the Butte Fault from Quagunt to Chuar is a lot easier than the Butte Fault between Nankoweap and Quagunt. He did do a lot of hiking. I tried to identify some places where he hiked. He was up on Nankoweap Butte a bunch of times from the north and from the south. So I got little dotted lines there. And then he and Joe Hamblin went down to the river and went down the river to try to check out a route further down the river, because again, I think that was their preferred choice here, was to try to do that. Well, if you've been on that route, you can get down to 60 Mile pretty easily, but then it gets a little sketchy. And then once you get past the Little Colorado, you're going to have to start climbing. So they decided that wasn't going to be the way, and they ended up following the Butte Fault. And my interpretation, based on what scant information is out there, is that they only followed the Butte Fault from Quagunt down to Chuar and not all the way from Nankoweap. So here's a couple of quick pictures. Here's the saddle from the camp. This is the top of the trail. What's kind of interesting here is there's a couple of blast marks Powell could have had some dynamite. It could be from Powell. I doubt that prospectors would spend the time, energy, and effort to do this. There was a later expedition in the 30s that was down for a month. And they said they did some trail improvement. I don't know if it could come from them, but kind of interesting in terms of historical evidence. Here's a picture of the trail. If you've been on it, you know that it's pretty skinny along the bottom of that big Supai cliff. Here's looking into Nankoweap, tilted mesa, and the trail comes down the slope on the side. Nankoweap Butte there on the opposite side of Nankoweap, and then the Butte Fault route goes on from there. Here's some definite trail construction in the red wall, in a couple spots like that. And then here's some other trail construction in the Tapeats. So certainly there are signs that that's the case. If you look at the old half map from 1927, 1936, I think even 1948 edition, there is an Nankoweap Trail shown on it, and then it goes to the bottom of the red wall and it stops because they didn't know where it went from there. This is from the Tapeats area, looking down at Nankoweap Butte, looking down at the valley, and looking on where the Butte Fault route's going to go from there. Here's looking down the river. So I would say, yeah, it's passable. I was doing this just a month ago. There's a lot of vegetation, but probably not as much as it was 140 years ago. And then here's from the Butte Fault looking back towards the Nankoweap area, the Saddle Mountain where the trail goes, and the tilted mesa where it comes down off of that high area. All right, and then here's coming into Quagunt off of the Butte Fault route, which, you know, doesn't look that bad, but I did this just a month ago, and it's like, yeah, you're not taking mules down that. So here's the next section to Chuar, the Butte Fault route to Chuar. And again, they did that all in one day. He did some hiking up into the upper reaches as part of his geological exploration. Went down the river. He said he went down the river 4 miles. He and B.L. Young camped at the river for a couple of days to do some of that. We'll see some of that a little bit later. And then from there, they had to ascend the Tapeats cliffs and get around some buttes into Unkar. So here's a couple of pictures of the Butte Fault route, Quagunt to Malgosa. Doesn't look too bad. Here's going into Awatubi and then on the way to 60 Mile. And here's 60 Mile going on to Carbon and Chuar. And you can see that those look pretty good. And the route from Nankoweap to Quagunt isn't like that. And then here's coming into Chuar Valley. There's a ring of Tapeats cliffs around there, and they're going to have to find their way through there later to get on to Unkar. Here's a little trail construction somewhere down Carbon or somewhere down the route here. I don't think it's actually in the part of Carbon that river runners use, but I could be wrong about that. And so I don't know if that's a relic of Walcott's time there, although prospectors were also there, so they might have done some little improvements. All right, so a couple of pictures in the Chuar area. This is a rock area he's interested in studying. This stuff is all part of the Grand Canyon supergroup, and this is where he wants to find fossils and wants to measure widths and see where they all fit into the geological story. This is from up looking down towards the river past Chuar Lava Hill and Lava Hill, and this is a drawing that B.L. Young made. It looks like he was about in the same spot as me. Here's a page from Walcott's journal just to sort of show you what that looked like. Wednesday, January 3rd, moved camp for myself and Brig Young down to shore of Colorado River. John Brown goes to Kanab, and Joseph Hamlin and Chill Brown take load of specimens out and kill a deer if possible. And that's about as enthusiastic as he ever got about something. But I'm sure after a month and a half of no fresh meat, they were pining for some. And down and how far did he walk down the river with B.L. Young? I don't know, but here's a picture, sketch that B.L. Young has in the paper. And it shows this basalt outcropping with a very distinctive step. And I've seen this before, and I've got a picture of it that's pretty close. It's not exact, but it's getting pretty close. And this is taken from Basalt Canyon. So right across from Tanner, it's like, man, did they walk all the way down there? I guess maybe they did, because that's where this picture is from. And then this is how they got out, this ring of cliffs. There's a little saddle that you can take to get into basalt, but it doesn't get you up on top of the cliffs. But there's this old trail / route that Doug Nearing mentioned to me. And I went out in 2012 and I was checking it out. It's like, oh yeah, I see what you're talking about. And then a close reading, I think, of Walcott's journal is that, yeah, this is how they got up on top of the Tonto. And then they went around the top of those cliffs all the way into Unkar. I have a couple of question marks here because I think this is where they camped on their way over. I checked it out, kind of looks possible, but there's nothing really definitive to say that's where they stayed, but seemed like the only place. So here's that maybe walking route down to Basalt, although that would be a little tricky, I think. But here's the route of the party with the mules and their equipment and everything, following along the Tonto until they can get down into the bed of Unkar, which they called Red Valley, and then camped down at the river. He walked down the river a couple of miles. I got up to about Hance Rapids, looking at stuff and doing some measurements. And then they took their mules up onto the Tonto again, got to a point farther south, and then they went back to their camp. And the next day they came back and they went down the chute that they found into Asbestos. The mules wouldn't be able to go down there. But he says he went down 1,700 feet, and 1,700 feet means he actually went all the way to the river to measure some of these rocks. And so I've only got the line drawn into the bed, but that's as far west as they got. And then after that, he said that the animals were doing poorly. They were running out of supplies. It was going to be really hard to keep going. So he was ready to turn around and head back home. So here's a few pictures going around that Tonto. At first, it's pretty easy, but then as you get around, it gets pretty bad. It gets pretty steep, and the footing is not very good. He wrote in his USGS report the following, quote, "Starting out, trail was cleared as we proceeded, sometimes along the level terrace and again on the brink of a cliff, where a stumble or a false step would have sent man or animal over a cliff from 300 to 800 feet in height and down a terrace slope 1,000 feet or more. Heading the canyon of Unkar, a broken place in the Tonto cliff permitted a trail to be worked zigzag down to the canyon bed." So yes, I did this in 2008 with a hiking buddy, Chris Forsyth, and I don't think we would ever recommend anybody do that again because it was pretty awful. But here's the place they went down. We were very happy to come around. That's Jupiter Temple up above, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a slope right through the tapeats, and we got right down to the bed and then right down to the river. So we're very happy about that. And then a few here on Asbestos. This is the Tabernacle. The last time I was there, 2020, we ended up coming in a little high and following the ridge on the right. And there was like a path going up there. It might be river runners that are using that, but I imagine that would have been how Walcott got up here and then gone around to the right of the Tabernacle. And then this is the beginning of the chute that goes down into Asbestos. And it's pretty steep, but it doesn't seem to be especially loose. I mean, I thought the footing was pretty good. I've done this a couple of times. This is looking back at it as I was climbing out in 2020. And so it's slow going, and you still have a ways to go to get down to the river. Well, just recently I found this photograph, or this sketch of B.L. Young's. It wasn't printed anywhere. It's in the Marston collection in California, and it's interesting for a couple reasons. One, it's got that little step in the basalt, so it's a different view, and it's written in looking up Grand Canyon from Unkar Valley. But actually, what's written in there is looking up the Grand Canyon from Red Valley, and then somebody scratched out Red and then wrote in Unkar. So at the time, again, they were referring to it as Red Valley. And these other two sketches are from the published paper of Walcott's in 1894. This is the map that got published with that. There's a couple extra names because it was 10 years later, but still a lot of stuff not very much named. But then he was interested in the geology, and so, this is like the precursor to the dragon map, I guess. This is not a dragon, I don't know what you would call that. Walcott came back to the Grand Canyon a few times. He came back in 1901. In fact, he was one of the first people to ride the train up to the South Rim. And he did all kinds of things back then. He went down to Indian Gardens. He went to Bass Camp. In fact, he crossed at Bass Rapids and was in Chinhumo for a few days. He went down the Grandview Trail. He came back in 1903 for about 10 days, came back in 1915 for just a few days. But, all these cases, he wasn't just hanging on the rim, he was going down. In fact, there's a story about him going down the Grandview Trail back in 1903 and finding some fossils and chipping them out and taking them with him. So don't do that anymore. I was in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to look up his gravestone. It's in the Rock Creek Cemetery. I also looked up I looked up Powell's, of course, his in Arlington. But this is the headstone for Walcott, died in 1927. There's a medal that is associated with him, the Charles Doolittle Walcott Medal, celebrating pre-Cambrian research. And it was started by his wife. It was established and endowed by his wife, Mary. This is his third wife. I didn't really talk anything about his private life, and he didn't really do that either. But his first wife died just a few years after they got married, and he thinks it was of diphtheria. His second wife and two of his children died in a train accident. And his third wife lived till 1940. So she endowed this medal. It was to be given out every 5 years. Here's a list of all the winners. There's a little gap there during World War II, sort of understandably. And then right at the end, you can see it goes from 2007 to 2013 to 2022. And that's because now it jumps to every 10 years. There's another medal that the National Academy of Science decided to incorporate as part of this rotation. So every 5 years, one or the other of these medals is given out. And so now this one is only given out every 10 years. But most recently, just a couple of years ago, to Mary Drozer. This is her, for her work in this area, paleontology, Precambrian stuff. She works mostly in South Australia, and it says here that she's got the discovery of some fossils to which she has naming rights, which is, of course, means that she's the first one to at least identify them. So that's kind of interesting, and so his spirit lives on, at least in terms of this medal. Well, back in 2007, the 125th year after Walcott was there, I talked my wife into going up and doing a hike into Nankoweap. And so we had a little celebration there at the saddle, because that's where Walcott was 125 years earlier. We were the only two there, so it wasn't like a big time celebration. But it was a nice hike anyway. We got down to the creek. That's as far as we went, and then came back up. But just to pencil in your calendars, We're only, what, 7 years away from the sesquicentennial, so 150th anniversary. And in 7 years, I think I'll still be able to hike at least up to the saddles. So maybe there'll be more people around for that particular celebration. One final comment I'll make here. Uh, when I did this presentation, I think I suggested, oh, wouldn't it be nice if there was like a butte named after Walcott? There is a rock layer named after him. There's the Walcott member of the Quagunt Formation, of the Chuar group, of the whatever. I'm not a geologist, so a lot of that just kind of glosses over. So there, and it actually is exposed in this area, the Walcott layer, and it's on the Trail of Time. So if you do that up at the South Rim, what is it, 200, I want to say 290 million years old? Just thinking off the top of my head, I don't know if that right or not. But it's identified as Walcott Shale. But I thought it'd be nice to have a butte named after him, and I started pursuing this, and then I kind of let it go because I was still working for a living. But now that I'm retired, maybe I'll bring that back up. But there's this little butte. It's between Chuar and Basalt. It's on that up above the Tapeats where they had to do all that climbing and all that work with the mules. But here's what it looks like from the Red Wall overlook on the Tanner Trail. A lot of people like to camp there as you look across the river. And you'd see this from Desert View. This is what it looks like up close. It has kind of a lot of character. I kind of like it. As opposed to the little hill that's right next to it. They could name that after Charles Haskell, maybe. But it has a little bit of character, and this is what it looks like from inside Chuar Valley. So it's not overwhelming. It's not like a real dominant thing, kind of like Walcott. It's like, hey, it's neat, it's important, but it didn't really overwhelm a lot of people apparently. Well, hopefully you found that of interest. I did pare this down from about 6 hours to just 50 minutes. I had to leave out all the stuff on the Egyptian cave that he found, but maybe a later presentation will use that material. So I think I can stop my sharing and go back to Wayne.
Thank you so much for that fascinating talk. That is very much improved and different from your talk you gave at the symposium. Looks like you've done a lot more research on it. And I'm just want to say to our listeners that if you want to have questions for Dr. Foster, you need to be signed in to the YouTube channel, Grand Canyon History YouTube channel. And there's a place where you can give your questions, and we look forward to that. I will say why people are signing into the YouTube channel to submit their questions. I think that's a fantastic idea to name that little butte between Basalt Canyon and Unkar Walcott Butte. I think it's a major oversight that nothing in that area of the canyon has been named for him. And that would be a very appropriate one since it is in Cambrian age strata, which he was rightly known for. Of course, after his Grand Canyon work, he went up to Canada and did all that famous work on the Burgess Shale. But I'm wondering if the Grand Canyon Historical Society can possibly help to effectuate that name change by submitting a proposal to the Board of Geographic Names.
Yes, it's yeah, like I say, I was interested in it a few years ago and then kind of let it drop. There were a couple of people that I kind of had contact with. I did talk to somebody, I want to say somebody at the USGS, and I said, oh yeah, I want to see if we can get a butte name for Walcott. And she goes, well, is anything named for him? And I said, well, there's a rock there. And she goes, well, then forget it. So
No, I
hopefully
mean,
she was just being too pessimistic.
well, being a geologist myself, technically to name a rock layer, you can't name rock layers after people. They have to be named after a geographic area. So there might be something in the canyon, a very small thing named after Walcott, but I don't think that would do that. We are getting a few comments here from Kim Christensen. He says, very interesting and thank you very much. Terry
Thank you.
Rylander writes, what would it take to officially name the butte? And there is a process for naming things, and the United States has a board of geographic names. And if I remember correctly, they meet every 2 years to consider submissions. And it's a fairly rigorous process. They don't just let you name things after your cat. So we would have to have a lot of information, but certainly, Dennis, you could help us with that.
Yes.
And Terry Cleland writes, I agree with the naming of Walcott Butte. And so um, I think this is something that maybe the Grand Canyon Historical Society could pursue, and we would certainly look for your help in that. You have really highlighted really one of the major expeditions that has occurred in the Grand Canyon that probably very few people know the details of.
Yes.
And some of the other interesting things that I found from your talk is that in the 1880s, Major John Wesley Powell was still coming into the Grand Canyon. That's quite a bit after his river trips, for which he's well known. And he did come back to the Grand Canyon 9 years after this Nankoweap expedition while the International Geological Congress, when many Europeans visited the Grand Canyon in 1891. But this is just a fantastic expedition, and I'm so glad that you have done the research to bring this to light for us.
Well, let me butt in here. On the map that is published in Walcott's paper, he shows a trail called the Congress Trail, named for that international Congress. And it's the Hance Trail, the new Hance Trail, or what we would call the new Hance Trail. And it's like, oh yeah, that got in there, but that didn't really wear well over time.
Well, I think that Congress did go to Hance's property, and that's where they assembled to view the Grand Canyon because Grand Canyon Village had not been established yet. So that's very interesting. Well, we don't have any other comments yet. Maybe people are having some difficulty with the YouTube channel, and I do want to mention that there were 4 people who were in the waiting room at some link that was present, but they eventually got in. And I just want to remind people that our talks now are live streaming on YouTube, and you can go back and watch them at any time. In fact, it was mentioned to the people who missed the very beginning of the talk that they could just use their slider to move to the beginning of the talk and watch the whole thing from the start. So those of you that attended tonight, I think we had at least 30 attendees, but maybe more. I was just looking at the beginning and people were still signing in. Tell your friends about this. People have hiked the Nankoweap Trail, and this is a very important thing. Yeah, Tom.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, it was a fabulous amount of research, incredibly physically challenging hike to research and investigate and explore these sites, and it was wonderfully presented. But addressing the naming, which is an excellent idea, I'm going to put on my GCHS administrative hat for the moment and suggest we put that under new business. We're meeting in 2 months for a board meeting. We have committees that can tackle this, so we can do it in an organized fashion. And we can invite Dennis Foster to be part of a subcommittee to look at naming of geographical or topological features according to a criteria we come up with. There's, like there was for National Historic Landmark, there's a nomination process. It has to be there's a folder or portfolio you need to put together, and then it goes to a committee. So Wayne, I will add that to our agenda for the July meeting. And Dennis, if you want some fantastic barbecue, come out for our meeting, our outing in July.
Super.
So
Oh, and it's going to be the same time as the picnic.
It's the same. The meeting is before the picnic.
Yes. Well, I want to say thank you for not scheduling it on the weekend of the Celtic Festival, because that's why I typically miss the picnics.
Okay.
Wayne, there's a few more questions in the chat.
Yes, Chris McIntosh. Fascinating to see this, especially having hiked Nankoweap a couple of times, but he didn't make it to the arch. And Green Adventures says, thank you for sharing your knowledge. Great presentation. From Alberto, the audio quality was much better on the YouTube channel than the regular Zoom that we used to use. And Beth Cook, Dennis, can you point us to any books? She didn't mention what books about, but I assume C.D. Walcott.
Yes, well, the Ellis Yokelson books have everything you would want to know and more about Walcott, but they are a little bit intimidating in terms of something maybe a little more general. It's hard to say. I mean, I read through Almond Harris Thompson's diaries preparing for this lecture, this little presentation, because I know he was up at that saddle and he was up there in 1872 after the river trip was over. And it's like, okay, I want to sort of put these pieces together. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't show up in a regular story somewhere. So it's like, okay, you read his journals, you read somebody else's journals, and it's hard to find something that is really good that is like just like on the Nankoweap area.
So Dennis, unlike the Zoom video, which would then be under Vimeo, the YouTube video, you can go into the comments section. It's as soon as the video, Davey Crockett will edit it and it'll be posted very soon. But as soon as that's ready, it has a comment section. You can add content.
Yes,
That's a big feature of YouTube that we didn't have before.
yes, that's actually very good. And I do intend to check back and, see what people have to say. And then I can recommend them watch my presentation on old
Super.
maps and forgotten trails of Grand Canyon.
Well, there's one last one here, and maybe some of the answer to this might be a little bit sensitive since it involves archaeology, but Old Caruso writes, can we talk about Cowboy Wash, early archaeological site? I don't know if that's appropriate for this or not, but do you have any comments about that?
I'm not familiar with the term.
Okay.
There is I want to say, kind of a funny story about Walcott. I mean, the fact that Walcott didn't write about anything except, we did this, we went there, I did readings and whatever. It's like, you were in this amazing place with all this amazing stuff, and there's no mention of it. But later on, one of his people, while he was a director of the USGS, came in with a paper that was saying, hey, we found evidence of older Indian groups in the Grand Canyon, in this Chuar area. And he goes, oh, what'd you find? It's like, well, we found this like fire pit. And he goes, oh, that was mine. And so the paper never got published.
Well, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. And again, to all of our listeners, if you have friends or family that would be interested in this, they'll be able to watch it on our YouTube channel. Consider becoming members. And thank you to Dr. Dennis Foster. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And thanks all of you for supporting the Grand Canyon Historical Society. We'll see you next month for Kevin Schindler talking about Brighty of the Grand Canyon. Thanks, everybody.